this is Larry Phillips. I'm with St. Pete's coach and teacher Roy Shoulders, and we're here in our continuing series to talk about the events of the day, and we are taping this one on July 8th. So we are fresh in the wake of Roe versus Wade and a number of other Supreme Court decisions that have been fairly controversial. But I wanted to go back to something, and we're going to talk about that shortly, but I wanted to go back to something that Roy, you said to me 2 years ago in the midst of the BLM demonstrations of the summer of 2020. And I think we were just talking on the phone, and I said, you know, I think social media has really been a bad thing for the country because this is in your face. Everybody thinks that this is happening in their own backyard, and it's been making us more divided. It's divisive, was my take. And you said, I think just the opposite. This is showing you how big a problem this is. It should be in your face. This should be in your consciousness. And now we're 2 years removed from that. Roe versus Wade has happened, and has been overturned. The demonstrations are nowhere near what they were 2 years ago, but they're out there. They're happening everywhere, and the divisiveness argument probably hasn't changed, but I think the influence of social media is maybe even more powerful than it was 2 years ago. What's your thoughts on that?
Social media in what aspect? Concerning Roe v. Wade or social issues in general?
Social issues in general.
Well, I think we're living in an age now that we have so much info in the palm of our hands, and the access to so much info in the palm of our hands. I'd say this, we're more enlightened now than we've ever been before, and social media has played a role in that. I think for change to come about, there needs to at times be an in your face about something. Because I think when it's right in your face and you have to deal with, let's face anything in life, when it's right in front of our face and we have to deal with it, we deal with it. We try to find solutions. I think a problem in our country has been that we deal with things when they are prominent at that moment, and we kind of put it in the back burner and move to something else, and sometimes we have to sit back and say, no, this is something that needs to be dealt with right now, so we need to put the energy to it. So I think social media has its bad elements, but I think social media has given way to a lot of positive things when it's bringing some of these social things to limelight.
I wonder too if we've always been divided. We fought a civil war in this country. The civil rights issues in the 60s, Vietnam. Every generation thinks their generation is going through the worst of all time, you know. I just wonder if social media has just made us more aware of what divides us. And maybe we focus on what divides us more than what unites us, because there's plenty in this country that unites us.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, because I think a lot of times, and it's funny you say that, because I was thinking something similar to that a couple days ago, is that we do put a lot of emphasis on the things that divide us. We need to start putting a lot of emphasis on the things that unite us. And we need to start putting an emphasis on healing, but it goes to what we were saying earlier, you getting to know me getting to know you. And social media, sadly, gives people of all ilks a platform to spew things that are divisive, a platform to spew things that are going to unite. But I really do sometimes think that we have to put focus on things that can bring us together and not allow the things that intend to divide us to supersede that. Things that will divide us are always going to be there. What can we do to not let that break the seal of what unites us? And we have to find ways. In order for our country to heal in so many ways, is that we have to sit down at the table like you and I are doing. Sit down at the table and talk to each other. Get to know each other. What are things that are concerns for you, whether they may not be a concern for me? Things that are concerns for me, but may not be for you. And once we get an appreciation, understanding of each other, then it really does lead to healing. And those things that divide us become less and less prominent.
When you see an issue like a Roe versus Wade, how much do you see in your classroom, the kids in your classroom, being a history teacher, how much does that come up? How much do you see, are they divided when they come into your classroom, and how strongly are they divided?
Are you talking about in particular Roe v. Wade?
Well, obviously you haven't been able to teach that because it just happened, but for any specific, I guess it depends on the issue as to how entrenched the kids are in what you see. How do you foster a conversation to promote, okay, well, here's a way to look at it, but here's another way to look at it without, like we were talking about before we started rolling here, how do we agree to disagree, or disagree without being disagreeable?
I think sometimes you have to learn how to express yourself and understand that people may not hold an opinion that you do, but respect their opinion and where it's coming from. I have to understand your hurt and pain, and I have to understand your concerns and where it's coming from to get a full grasp of that. For example, we have a young lady in our school. If you remember a couple years ago, there was the involvement of a young lady, I think it was in Columbus, where law enforcement responded and the young lady ended up being killed by the police. Well, that was a relative of hers. So she may have strong feelings about law enforcement that are negative. I have to understand where her hurt and pain comes from in dealing with that, and not look at her and go, how can you feel? Well, sometimes you have to understand the situation that a person comes from that leads to how they feel. Not all of our kids agree about everything.
Right.
We have very heated discussions. When I say heated, meaning you have people who have very strong opinions on both sides of the matter. And I think part of an educator is teaching kids how to converse and disagree in a respectful manner, that part of it isn't, I am trying to change everything about you. I'm trying to give you information from my point of view, get information from your point of view. I may not change you, you may not change me, but let's respect where we're coming from. And what's the old saying, agree to disagree? And I think that's a thing that, I think it's a talent to be a mediator in discussions like that, because it can get really out of hand. And I think a lot of times when it comes to particular things, because we're at St. Pete's and we're a Catholic school, that everyone thinks, well, okay, all of our kids are going to agree about a certain thing because they're Catholic, we're a Catholic school. No, 60-some-odd% of our student body is non-Catholic. So when we talk about a Roe v. Wade, we know the Catholic Church's stance on pro-life. Well, that leads to some pretty interesting discussions in the classroom.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Does that have color how you teach?
Well, no, I think we are called as teacher ministers. That's what we're referred to in our contract. We're called as teacher ministers to understand that we work in a Catholic school and that Catholic doctrine, is part of what we do. But we still have teachers that are not Catholic. I always say, like, my pro-life stance really has nothing to do with my Catholicism. It has everything to do with my background. Being an adopted kid, of understanding in 1965, biracial kids like me, 70-some-odd% were aborted. So even before I was born, the odds were against me to survive.
Right.
And so my pro-life stance has always come from that alone, regardless if I'm Catholic or not. That honestly has nothing to do with it. Knowing that there was a greater chance of me not surviving than surviving has always led me to be so appreciative of the decisions that were made, and for me to be allowed to experience life, because it would have been more convenient to get rid of my life, because I was a social inconvenience at the time. That's what I was. I was a social inconvenience at the time. And so when we have conversations with kids in class, understand who I am and my background and where I come from, here's how I feel, and based upon, and I think that's the beautiful thing about education is we allow an environment for kids to, we're often telling kids, express yourself and your thoughts, but then we get uncomfortable when they do.
Yeah.
And it's like, we tell you, express your opinion, give us your opinion, be bold in your opinion, sit down and shut up. Sorry, I hit the table. I was told not to hit the table by our producer. Okay, so I hit the table. So who knows what that looks like? But I think that's such a contradiction as we spend so much time in a classroom telling a kid, empower, your voice is important. See, I'm hitting my hand. You're empowered, your voice is important. Stand up, express yourself. But then when they do, be quiet, okay, that's not right. We have to find a way to allow them to express. And I think that's part of what we need to do is teach them how to express themselves in a respectful manner to be able to do that.
I was talking to some of the folks here about the topic we would discuss today, and somebody said, I don't know that you should talk about Roe versus Wade if you don't have a female voice in the room. And I thought, that's a fair point. What we just talked about before, a life experience, a shared experience. They bring that voice would bring an experience that neither one of us has. But if we looked at it from kind of what I would like to do is look at it from a historical perspective, because you're a history teacher. Both of us grew up with Roe versus Wade as the law of the land, and for almost 50 years, it has been the law of the land, and now the law is changing. And again, I think some people, not a lot of people, some people don't understand that overturning Roe versus Wade puts the decision back at the states, not at the federal level, it's at the state level. Now, will that mean that abortion is outlawed in Ohio? Very possible. But it does not mean that abortion is illegal nationwide. And two very distinct things. But my question to you, Roy, is have you had a chance to teach or maybe even probe the history of the Supreme Court and the personality that it has taken through the years? I mean, we talked about this a little. I was a history minor in college. We talked about this a little bit. The Berger Court had a personality. The Warren Court had a personality. As far as I'm concerned, Justice Warren's behavior in the Kennedy assassination is reprehensible. And we're talking about Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and I'm calling his behavior reprehensible when it comes to the Kennedy assassination. So, I mean, obviously opinions are opinions, everybody has one. But to me, it's fascinating to see the character of a court. And I think Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice right now, does not like the character of his court. I think he wanted to be and please disagree with me because I really am just kind of talking off the top of my head. To me, he wanted to be a kind of a middle of the road guy. I don't want to go in one direction like Warren did. I don't want to go in another direction. I don't want to have a Dred Scott on my watch. But yet, absolutely, overturning Roe versus Wade is what's going to stick to Justice Roberts' tenure. And to me, he is going to hate that.
I've often felt that he is someone that is, let's face it, when you're Supreme Court Justice, you're good with the uncomfortable. But I've always viewed him as someone who is not comfortable necessarily with the uncomfortable. And he has been placed in a position in the last several years where, he's had to be a discerning voice. And I think that's put him in a spot that he does not feel comfortable being in. This, let's face it, good, bad, or ugly, the Roe v. Wade will stick with him when we refer to the Roberts Court.
I was just going to say, now, are we incorrectly referring to it? Should we call it the Dobbs decision or overturning Roe? I mean, obviously, what you're saying, what I'm saying is the exact same thing.
Right.
Overturning Roe is what they're going to be known for.
Right.
This course, for sure.
Right. But I think along the conservative realm, they're obviously going to be applauded for this.
Right.
You know, the one
And
argument
vilified
on the other side.
Yeah.
And it really is, let's face it, it really is a no-win situation. Because for years, there has been the clamoring for Roe v. Wade being overturned. And now the court is in a position that, and I think, if someone asked me, like, you know, when's the last time that there was a strong conservative leaning court? And I said, well, several things had to fall in place. So many years of things had to happen to fall in place where not only was the political climate ready for this, but the social climate was ready for this, and the social influence. I think, you know, there are two things here. The political and the social are both almost in so many ways hand in hand. And timing, I think, is everything. This was, when I say the right time, that does not mean favoring or not favoring the decision. It's saying the timing was right for this to happen. And this court in particular, good, bad, or ugly, this will always be the one thing I think that will always be brought up with this particular court, and Judge Roberts will, you know, sadly have that stuck to him. Again, good, bad, or ugly, your thoughts on the decision or not, it will always be stuck with him.
It seems ironic to me that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has always been an icon, especially for the left. But yet, if she had resigned while President Obama was president, she would have been replaced with another justice from the left. Her not doing that, she was replaced by a Trump-appointed justice, in this case Kavanaugh, who was it was a 5-4 vote to overturn. Dobbs was a 6-3 vote. To overturn Roe v. Wade was a 5-4 vote. So Ginsburg's seat being replaced by Kavanaugh was the one that flipped it and overturned the decision, Roe v. Wade. And yet here she is the champion. Mm-hmm. It just seems so ironic,
right.
You know,
right.
That you could point to that and say, you know, Ruthie, if you had resigned with President Obama in office, mm-hmm. we wouldn't be going through this, you know. So, mm-hmm. I know she would. I know Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but obviously she would not want that stuck to her legacy either.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's politics. Well, it's a practice. I shouldn't say politics. The Supreme Court in there because they're separated from the politics. I just say the legalese of it all is very interesting.
Yeah. And I don't know the legalese in the case well, but I do know, even in college, they talked about that to us, and that was in the 80s for me, that Roe v. Wade was a very tenuous decision. It was always fragile. It was, and the thing that made it hard for the right to swallow, obviously, not just abortion, but yet it spawned other decisions. And I think that's the fear on the left, that overturning it will spawn other decisions that lean in one direction so heavily, like Roe v. Wade did in the other direction so heavily. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wonder, I mean, we're very early, we're 2 weeks out from this happening, where we're gonna go, or where the court's gonna go from here.
I think we're just beginning a long slippery slope. I saw something right before I came in where President Biden, and so I hope I'm getting all of this correct. If not, we'll just edit this out. President Biden, something about an executive order being issued that will protect certain abortion rights. Larry, I have no idea where all of this is going to go. I mean, it's, you know, you have several states that have the trigger laws.
Yeah.
You know, and who knows where this is going to go. And I think we're just at the beginning of seeing the ripple effect societally. But now with it being back in the hands of the state and so-called in the hands of the people, now does it come to how important will be gubernatorial elections?
Exactly.
You know, now will people start paying close attention to mayoral elections? Because you want people to be locally a voice, but then, you know, your state reps, again, gubernatorial election. I mean, how important will that be now, the focal point of, gosh, who knows where we're going to be with this?
It's interesting that you mentioned the slippery slope, because in other decisions, they've talked about that on the other side of the aisle, that the gun rights folks are always concerned about the slippery slope. Well, if you ban this, then that means that next is up and next is up. And so the slippery slope is a real thing for both sides when it comes to whatever issue we're talking about. And this one, in Roe v. Wade, we're looking at really changing how people engage morally. I saw.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I saw how a Hollywood person, his name's Ken Olin. He was the executive producer of This Is Us. I don't know if you ever saw the TV show. In the 80s, he was a star in the show 30 something. And he tweeted, after Roe v. Wade happened, he tweeted something along the lines, I don't have it memorized word for word, but he tweeted something along the lines, all the pro-life people should now be jumping on the bandwagon of, once a woman is pregnant, then the father's on the hook for all, her and the baby's care and feeding from that point on. And the pro-life response was, you're singing our song. This is what we've been saying all along. And I just find it kind of ironic that, it's almost like there's a moral thing involved in this, and I'm not sure that the people have grasped how fundamentally this changes things, not just legally, but morally too.
I think that's part of the problem we have when we talk about being able to discuss things. When you throw morals and values into something, and the insinuation of, if you're pro-choice, you're immoral. You're pro-life, well then you're going by a moral value. When you start talking about the character of people, I think one reason that it's difficult sometimes for folks to have very intimate discussion, sensitive discussion, is that when you start talking about the character of the person. And I think this is, I'd say in the short time that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, I've seen so many arguments happen between people, and morals are at the forefront. And it's tough to have a discussion. Be like you and I have a discussion about women's rights and a woman's not here. Be like you and I have a discussion about the plight of women in our country, or the plight of Native Americans in our country, and there's not a woman or Native American here. It's such a difficult topic because, now I think what this is going to really lead to is when does life begin? What is life? And someone saying, my body, my choice. And now you have the other side saying, what about the life and the body of the child? I mean, this is one of those discussions where, quite honestly, it is a no-win discussion no matter what. You can get very logical and educated people on both sides of the coin, and they are not going to agree on this, because my definition of what things are different than what your definition of what things are, and how dare you as a man say this, and I just don't, it's just another thing added to the pot that I just do not know if will ever come to a decision where obviously everyone will be in some form of agreement.
No, I don't think we'll ever agree.
Because you know what? I can make all the statements I want to about pro-life, and there can be a lady sitting across from me that will basically say everything I'm saying is wrong and she should have the decision on what to do with her body, and I can say, well, what about the body of the child? Well, what is that? It's my body. Now, it's like, being on a treadmill, you can run hard as you want, but you really never go anywhere.
Yeah. There's not an issue that I know of that hasn't been completely argued out on both sides. Is there anything new that anybody can bring to the table that's going to turn anybody around? To me, it's almost like every person's experience is going to color this argument for them individually. and nothing's going to change your personal experience, you know. So where do you go from that? The law of the land has changed. Now it's time to react to that in one way, shape, or form. So, but back to the argument about, or not an argument, but just back to the study of the Supreme Court and its history. It's had a checkered history too. You know, we've talked about the checkered history of the United States, but you know, the Supreme Court's had separate but equal written into decisions, majority decisions. The Dred Scott case referenced earlier, you know, again, these were the law of the land, and the law of the land was controversial, and today's no different.
When you go back to Dred Scott, we were covering this in my 8th grade social studies class, and we're looking at the arguments that were presented. You know, did Dred Scott's residence in Free State territory make him free? But when you look at Roger Taney's decision, and the one thing I keep telling the kids over time and time again, I say, read that again, where he, Supreme Court Justice of the United States, stated that African Americans have no rights that this court is bound to follow. In other words, when he made that decision, he didn't say slaves. He said African Americans, black people. So whether you were one of the free African Americans that lived along the East Coast or the North, and you had some scattered throughout the South, it basically stated that African Americans had no rights as citizens that the court was bound to abide by. So it basically said that, my gosh, it didn't make a difference of what my status is as a black person, be I free or be I slave, I'm not protected by the Constitution. That's not us just giving an opinion on, oh my gosh, what is that? I mean, that is when we talk about history. I mean, it's an important thing to bring to the forefront. And that's not shedding ill light on who we are as a country. We're just stating history. But can you imagine how fearful of a time that must have been? You know, for those that were free in our country, to basically have the Supreme Court say, we don't view you as citizens of this country, and you're not protected by the Constitution. So good luck. Good luck. Yeah.
Frightening. I wonder, from a historian's perspective.
I teach history. I'm not a historian. See, that gives me a different title and level.
Okay.
That means I'm a heck of a lot smarter than what I actually am. Okay. When you say, you know, so and so was a historian, you look at them and go like, ooh. Okay. I mean, come on now.
Well, I thought you made an interesting point about timing, and each court kind of takes on a character of its own, or a personality of its own, and looking through history, the 60s court was very different than the court today, and for 50 years, 49 plus, that influence was felt. I think that's the scariest part of overturning Roe versus Wade is this going to be the personality of the next 50 years of the rule of law in the country, you know, and where does that lead to? What does that mean? You know, the Supreme Court is much longer lasting than the era of Trump or the influence of Joe Biden, or, you know, their appointments last
very long.
You know, so to me that's maybe okay. From a history person's perspective, that's what's the bigger picture question. You know, now what?
The Supreme Court, when you look at the individuals there, you know, the Supreme Court is basically set for a while to be leaning one way, if you want to say that. And my gosh, I mean, who knows? Here's what went through my mind. At what point in time, if there's a shift again in the court, and let's say it's more, we'll say liberal leaning, how long is that down the road? Because we're still looking years and years and years and years down the road. What changes will then come about? Someone said, well, okay, if we ever have the next time we have a court that may be a little bit more liberal leaning, will Roe v. Wade, what will happen then? What will the court decide based upon that? Will they take it out of the state's hands? Again, I don't know. And that's what I always tell folks, a lot of times when they think that presidents have power, when you talk about hot button topics like abortion and so forth, and I say, well, it's not, the president has really nothing to do with that per se unless he is appointing members to the Supreme Court. I mean, this isn't necessarily a Joe Biden issue or Donald Trump issue or Barack Obama issue. It's really not. I mean, Supreme Court, this lies in their hands. Now, those judges who were appointed, that is going to have more of an influence, than Joe Biden can disagree all he wants with this decision. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we talk about perspective. I believe Clarence Thomas was a Reagan appointee. Is that right? Reagan or Bush? Maybe it was Bush. The first Bush.
Yeah.
But we're looking at 30 years that Clarence Thomas has been on the bench.
I think he was a Bush appointee.
And yeah, that sounds right. But Donald Trump was in for 4 years and appointed
3.
Yeah.
Boy, I tell you what, luck of the draw there.
Yeah. Well, we talked about that. It's almost become a strategic thing, and probably always was. But it comes into now. You think about it when something like this happens. I think that probably
it's one of those things where the court's not political, but yet it is.
For sure it is. It's not supposed to be. Ideally,
right.
And our publisher J.L. Red says all the time, I just want the 9 smartest people in the country, smartest legal minds in the country to sit on that. Well, ideally, I agree with that, but nobody is apolitical, or almost nobody is apolitical.
And the pressure that president would face, if a spot comes up open now, the pressure and the expectation that president would face about the appointee is immense. And let's face it, that appointee is going to go, this is where I say the court's not supposed to be political, yet it is. That appointee will go in line with political ideologies of the president because that's someone he is looking for, or maybe one day she is looking for. So there will be a political element to it, whether we want to admit it or not. Once they're appointed to the court, then that's where we say the politics, take a back step. But yeah, I think we're in for some very interesting times.
Well, when the Kavanaugh hearings, Senate hearings took place about Justice Kavanaugh, it was nasty, really ugly stuff. And it was fascinating to me to see young people comment on this, like, this has never happened before. I was like, I remember the Clarence Thomas hearings very well.
Gosh.
That was just as nasty.
Oh gosh, to this day I still remember, and I'm paraphrasing his quote, where he made the comment, this is a modern day political lynching of a black man.
Right.
And that was one of those moments you're like, wow, okay. But it goes back to what we had talked about earlier about the influence of social media. Just think now, the availability of news in general. When we're talking about Clarence Thomas is going through everything, how many news outlets were there?
3, maybe 4.
Right, but now you look and ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, C-SPAN. I mean, just think of all the outlets. So the plethora of availability of news is, my gosh, how much is just thrown at us and the availability of it.
And well, with social media too, everybody feels like they have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have people, I don't know how many people are tweeting in the country, but a lot, significant number.
Mm-hmm.
And they throw it out there, and who knows what gets retweeted and retweeted by who, and then, you know, it's
And
just,
sadly for some folks, their source of news is Twitter, and it's not the most reliable source of some people you're getting news from. You know, I mean, let's face it, it could be someone who's sitting in a basement somewhere eating a dilly bar, and he decides to make this comment, and you run with it, it's gospel. I mean, come on now.
that's the concern about.
Dilly bars are not bad, by the way. And the Mulheron family locally, you know I love Dairy Queen, so let's not take that personal.
Well, that was at the start of this, we were talking about social media, and you kind of flipped that on me with, you know, hey, this needs to be discussed, this needs to be in your face, you need to be aware of the impact on this, on a segment of this society that maybe you're not aware of, and so there is that good and bad in social media, but when you, that great philosopher Mike Tyson said,
Oh, jeez.
what social or what Twitter or what's pick your social media outlet has done is empowered people to say whatever the hell they want to say without threat of getting punched in the face.
Right, that's right. Until he met that guy on the airplane who thought that he could go ahead and keep, you know, pressing Tyson's buttons, you know. And that is true. I mean, everyone flexes. Let's face it, the one thing about social media that I hate, and this is, I'm going to talk like from a school perspective, you know, the days of bullying where if you had an issue with someone, you were face to face and you stated it to their face and you handled it. However, those days, it's so easy now to get behind some screen or get behind my phone and tweet something out about someone or put something on Snapchat or whatever it may be. I mean the cowardice way now, where I think social media has given those, I'm going to keep referring to as Twitter muscles, but given Twitter muscles to people to sit behind, you know, their phone and tweet something out that, you know, no one knows who you are or knows where you're at or anything about you, and you can make these comments. So that is the one negative about it. I'd say when we go back to the educational part with social media, you know, bullying in school, when we look at the origin, the roots of the cause of more times than not, it's what something said about someone on social media. And it takes a life of its own, and next thing you know, you have kids who have beef with each other in school, and it started all about something someone said about someone on Snapchat. Or, you know, what someone, you know, tweeted out about someone. You know, that's where I say the negative of social media is just, you know, giving a platform to people to express themselves, I think sometimes in a cowardice way.
Good and bad and everything.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Well, thanks. We hope you join us again next time.